My name is Lillian. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by a mess of papers that tell the story of my misplaced trust. The numbers on these documents, once a symbol of my love and sacrifice, now feel like chains around my wrists. It was just a few days ago that I made the decision to cancel the credit card that my brother Ethan had been using for years. The weight that lifted off my shoulders was almost palpable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It all started with a long drive. The highway stretched out in front of me, a pale gray ribbon beneath a sky that couldn't decide between sunshine and storm. I had been driving since dawn, the kind of long drive that makes you feel both restless and numb at the same time. In the back seat, wrapped in layers of linen, sat a wooden keepsake box, a gift from my grandfather, who was a master woodworker. Inside it, I'd placed a pair of antique silver goblets that had been passed down through our family for generations. Tonight, I planned to give them to Ethan as a gesture of blessing for his engagement. Ethan and I grew up in a small town in Vermont. Our parents were hardworking but strict, always emphasizing the importance of family and loyalty. My father was a no-nonsense man who believed in tough love, while my mother was more nurturing but also quick to scold. Despite the strict upbringing, Ethan and I were inseparable as children. We spent hours exploring the woods behind our house, building forts, and fishing in the nearby stream. I remembered the time we went fishing, and Ethan, who was always the mischievous one, would tug on his line to pretend he had a bite. I'd laugh so hard that my sides would ache. As we got older, life took us in different directions. I stayed in Vermont, working hard to build a stable life for myself. I bought a small house and took on a mortgage, while Ethan moved to the city to pursue his dreams. Over the years, he faced one financial crisis after another. The first time he asked for help, he was starting a tech startup. I scraped together $15,000 from my savings, money that I had set aside for home repairs. He promised me that it was a sure thing, that he'd pay me back within a year. But the business failed, and the money was never returned. Then there was the time he and his fiancée, Olivia, were about to lose their apartment in the city. He called me, almost in tears, asking for help. Without hesitation, I wired $30,000 to his account. He swore he'd never forget what I did for him, that he'd make it right as soon as they got back on their feet. But as the months turned into years, he never mentioned it again. And then there was the credit card. I had given it to him for emergencies, but it became a regular part of his spending. Every month, I'd pay the bill, telling myself that it was easier than starting a fight. I believed that my sacrifice was a sign of my love and loyalty as a sister. The long drive was filled with memories of our childhood. I thought about the nights when Ethan would sneak into my room after a nightmare, insisting he wasn't scared, just bored. I was so looking forward to seeing him again, to sharing this special moment. I believed that this engagement dinner could be a bridge, a chance to strengthen our bond. When I finally reached his city, the sky had turned soft and gray, the kind that held its breath before rain. I adjusted the keepsake box on the seat beside me and whispered to myself, "This is worth it." As I pulled into his driveway, I felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The neighborhood was quiet, with perfectly manicured lawns and identical porches. Ethan's apartment building was taller than I expected, all glass and steel, nothing like the cozy house we grew up in. I sat in the car for a moment, with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. I told myself that the long drive had been worth it. The wooden keepsake box felt heavier when I lifted it from the seat. I straightened my shoulders, walked up the steps, and knocked on the door. For a few seconds, I heard nothing but the faint sound of laughter from inside. Then the door swung open. Olivia stood there, her hand still on the knob, her eyes widening just enough to show surprise before she composed herself. She looked past me as if checking whether anyone else was there, then back at the box in my arms. "I brought something for the engagement dinner," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a thin smile. "They had the dinner yesterday," she said lightly. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. Yesterday, just close family, she added, almost as an afterthought, though her eyes didn't waver from mine. The box pressed into my arms until it seemed to burn. Behind her, I could hear the sound of glasses clinking and people talking, a party I wasn't invited to. I stood there, frozen, the threshold between us feeling more solid than any wall. Olivia's smile didn't change, and she didn't move aside. For a moment, I hoped that Ethan would appear behind her, that he would laugh and say it was all a mix-up. But the seconds stretched on, and no one came. Maybe another time, she said politely. Then the door closed, leaving me alone on the porch. I sat back in the driver's seat, the keepsake box on the passenger side like an accusation. My arms ached from holding it, waiting for a welcome that never came. I stared at my phone, half expecting a message from Ethan, some explanation or apology. But the screen stayed dark, and the silence was deafening. As I drove away, the streets blurred together, and every lighted window was a reminder of where I didn't belong. I couldn't face the long drive home that night, so I pulled into a roadside motel. Inside the room, the silence was overwhelming. I set the box on the table untouched and lay back on the stiff mattress. My mind was filled with memories of all the times I had been there for Ethan, only to be ignored or taken for granted. When I got home, I went straight to the drawer in my desk, the one I rarely opened. It was filled with the evidence of my sacrifices, the loan agreements, the property tax notices, and the credit card statements. I laid the papers out on the desk, one by one, and the numbers stared back at me like a tally of my misplaced trust. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the credit card in my hand. The plastic was worn, the edges softened from years of being used by Ethan. My name was printed across it, but it had never really belonged to me. I reached for the phone and dialed the number on the back. Yes, I said, steady and clear. Cancel it effective immediately. A few keystrokes later, the line went silent, and so did the weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. A few days later, the phone rang. I was in the garden, pruning the last of the summer flowers, when I saw Ethan's name flash across the screen. For a moment, I just watched it ring, remembering all the times I had called him only to be ignored. This time, I let it buzz twice before I answered. Lillian, the card doesn't work. Did you forget to pay? He said, his voice sharp and uneven. There was no greeting, no pause, just panic in his words. I could hear voices in the background, Olivia's urgent and clipped tones, and the sound of someone knocking at the door. I canceled it, I said quietly. He fell silent, the line crackling between us. Then came the sound of disbelief, the incredulous half-laugh I knew so well. You? What? Lillian, you can't just. How are we supposed to? He stammered. It was never supposed to be yours, Ethan, I said, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of the cut flowers. His words tumbled out, shifting from anger to pleading. Just until I sort things out. I'll pay you back. I swear this time. Don't leave me hanging like this, please. But I didn't feel the urge to rush to his rescue anymore. I let the silence expand, filling the space where my fear used to live. I forgot, I said at last, my tone steady. Before he could reply, I ended the call. The calls didn't stop. Ethan rang again and again, his voice shifting from anger to reason to desperation. But I listened to him with a new sense of calm. I realized that his charm, which had once worked on me, now only reminded me of how much I had given away without question. The messages started a couple of days later. Long strings of words filled with guilt, sorrow, and promises. But I read them without replying. When I opened my phone and saw Olivia's social media posts, filled with photos of their happy life, I felt no pain. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I decided to take control of my life. I made a practical choice and sent an extra payment toward my mortgage. Watching the balance drop gave me a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with numbers. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never had the money for. And I wrote a check to a local charity, giving without the need for recognition. As autumn deepened, I felt a new sense of purpose. The keepsake box still sat on the hallway table, but I no longer felt the need to give it to Ethan. It was mine, a symbol of my self-preservation. One evening, the phone rang again. It was Ethan. His voice was low, heavy with what might have been regret. He stumbled through words about mistakes, about pressures I couldn't understand, about wanting to make things right. I listened in silence, my silence now a boundary. When he paused, waiting for me to soften, I said only that I heard him. I didn't offer more. After we hung up, I walked to the hallway and picked up the keepsake box. I carried it to my study and placed it in the cabinet drawer, locking it with a small brass key. It no longer felt like a gift withheld. It felt like preservation, waiting for someone who would understand its weight and treat it with the reverence it deserved. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the drawer. I realized that family ties are not defined by blood or blind giving. They are built on mutual respect and accountability. For years, I had equated love with sacrifice and silence with loyalty. But now, I saw things differently. I felt the ground beneath me steady, and I walked into the quiet of my room, carrying with me not loss, but a new certainty of what it meant to belong.